Welcome to our channel of terror and dread, where spine-chilling tales come to life. Brace yourselves, viewers, for you are about to embark on a journey of fear and suspense. We advise against watching alone, lest you risk the haunting shadows that may linger long after the screen fades to black. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Our stories, though true, have been cloaked in anonymity to protect the innocent. Get ready to uncover the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives. The Shadow Healer, Chapter 1, The Arrival of Dr. Blackwood. Dr. Victor Blackwood arrived in the small town of Ash Grove with little fanfare but a lot of intrigue. His reputation as a child psychiatrist who could cure even the most troubled children had spread like wildfire. Parents desperate for help flocked to his clinic, drawn by the promise of a cure for their children's behavioral issues, anxiety, and other psychological problems. Dr. Blackwood was a tall, imposing figure with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through a person. He dressed impeccably, his demeanor calm and confident. His methods were unconventional, but his results were undeniable. Children who had been withdrawn, violent, or uncontrollable emerged from his care transformed, their issues resolved as if by magic. The catch? Each parent had to provide a vial of their own blood. It was a strange request, but one that Dr. Blackwood insisted was crucial for his unique therapeutic approach. "It's a simple requirement," he would say with a reassuring smile. "A small price to pay for your child's well-being." Chapter 2, The First Success. The first family to seek Dr. Blackwood's help was the Martins. Their son, Timmy, had been struggling with severe anxiety and night terrors for years. Traditional therapy and medication had done little to help. Desperate and exhausted, they agreed to Dr. Blackwood's condition without hesitation. Dr. Blackwood conducted a brief consultation with Timmy and then retreated to his private office with the vial of Mrs. Martin's blood. An hour later, he emerged with Timmy, who appeared calmer and more composed than he had in months. "Your son will sleep soundly tonight," Dr. Blackwood assured the Martins. And he was right. That night, for the first time in years, Timmy slept peacefully, free from the nightmares that had plagued him. The Martins were overjoyed and spread the word about the miraculous doctor. Soon, more families followed. The Wilsons brought in their rebellious teenage daughter, Emily. The Carters sought help for their autistic son, Michael. Each time, Dr. Blackwood required a vial of the parents' blood and spent a solitary hour in his office before producing seemingly miraculous results. Chapter 3, The Skeptic. Not everyone was convinced of Dr. Blackwood's methods. Alice Cooper, a local journalist, smelled a story. She had always been skeptical of quick fixes and miracle cures, and Dr. Blackwood's success seemed too good to be true. Determined to uncover the truth, she began to investigate. Alice interviewed parents, teachers, and even some of the children who had been treated by Dr. Blackwood. The stories were all remarkably consistent. Troubled children transformed into well-behaved, happy individuals overnight. The only constant was the mysterious hour spent in Dr. Blackwood's office with the vial of blood. One evening, Alice decided to visit the clinic herself. Posing as a parent in need, she secured an appointment with Dr. Blackwood. During their meeting, she feigned interest in his methods, hoping to glean some information. But Dr. Blackwood was guarded, his responses vague and non-committal. After her session, Alice lingered outside the clinic, hoping to catch a glimpse of what transpired inside. As night fell, she saw Dr. Blackwood leave the building with a small locked case. Intrigued, she followed him at a distance, watching as he made his way to the outskirts of town. Chapter 4, The Discovery. Alice's heart raced as she tailed Dr. Blackwood to an abandoned warehouse. She watched from the shadows as he entered the building, her curiosity burning. After a few minutes, she crept closer and found a side door that was slightly ajar. Inside, the warehouse was dark and musty. Alice could hear Dr. Blackwood's footsteps echoing through the vast space. She followed the sound, moving cautiously. Eventually, she reached a dimly lit room where she saw Dr. Blackwood standing before an altar, surrounded by strange symbols and artifacts. On the altar were the vials of blood he had collected from the parents. Dr. Blackwood was chanting in a language Alice didn't recognize, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. As she watched in horror, he poured the blood into a large, ornate bowl and continued his incantation. Alice realized with a jolt that Dr. Blackwood was performing some kind of dark ritual. The vials of blood, the symbols, the chanting, it all pointed to something sinister. She took out her phone and started recording, determined to expose the truth. Suddenly, Dr. Blackwood stopped chanting and turned to face her, his eyes locking onto her hiding spot. "I know you're there, Miss Cooper," he said, his voice calm and chilling. "Why don't you come out and join me?" Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Alice's heart pounded as she stepped out of the shadows, her phone still recording. "What are you doing, Dr. Blackwood?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm simply helping these children, Miss Cooper, just as I promised." This isn't therapy," Alice said, gesturing to the altar. "This is dark magic. You're using the parents' blood for some kind of ritual." Dr. Blackwood's smile widened. "Very perceptive, Miss Cooper. Yes, I am performing a ritual, but it's not what you think. The blood is a conduit, a way to connect with the life force of the parents. It allows me to heal the children by transferring a small part of the parents' essence to them." Alice's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "But why the secrecy? Why the dark rituals?" "Because people fear what they don't understand," Dr. Blackwood replied. "If I told them the truth, they would never agree to it. But look at the results, Ms. Cooper. These children are healed. Isn't that worth a little secrecy?" Alice felt a chill run down her spine. "And what about the parents? What happens to them?" Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened. "There is always a price for healing, Ms. Cooper. The parents lose a small part of themselves, but it's a sacrifice they're willing to make for their children. And in return, their children are freed from their suffering." Alice couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're playing God, Dr. Blackwood. You're tampering with forces you shouldn't be." "Perhaps," Dr. Blackwood said, his eyes gleaming. "But I'm also giving these families hope, something they haven't had in a long time." Chapter 6. The Revelation. Alice's mind was in turmoil as she left the warehouse. She knew she had to expose Dr. Blackwood, but she also felt a strange sense of conflict. The children he had treated were genuinely better. Could it be possible that his methods, however dark, were actually helping? Determined to find more evidence, Alice continued her investigation. She spoke to more parents, digging deeper into their experiences. She discovered that while the children improved, the parents began to suffer from unexplained illnesses and fatigue. Some even showed signs of severe depression and anxiety, mirroring the issues their children had once faced. The pieces started to fall into place. Dr. Blackwood's ritual was transferring not just the essence, but also the afflictions of the children onto their parents. The price of the cure was far higher than anyone had realized. Armed with this new information, Alice returned to the warehouse, determined to confront Dr. Blackwood one last time. She found him there, as if he had been expecting her. "Back again, Miss Cooper?" he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "What have you discovered this time?" "I know what you're doing," Alice said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're transferring the children's problems onto their parents. You're not curing them. You're just shifting the burden." Dr. Blackwood sighed. "You're only partially correct, Ms. Cooper. The ritual does transfer the afflictions, but it's not just about shifting the burden. It's about balance. To heal one, another must suffer. It's the way of the world." Alice felt a surge of rage. "You're playing with people's lives. You're destroying families." Dr. Blackwood's expression hardened. "I am saving children. If the parents must suffer for that, so be it." They agreed to the sacrifice. Alice couldn't believe his callousness. "They didn't know the full extent of the sacrifice. They trusted you." "And their children are better for it," Dr. Blackwood retorted. "Would you deny them that?" Chapter 7. The Unraveling. Alice left the warehouse, her mind made up. She had to stop Dr. Blackwood, but she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to the parents she had spoken to, sharing her findings and urging them to come forward. At first, they were reluctant, but as more and more parents shared their experiences, the tide began to turn. A small group of parents led by Alice confronted Dr. Blackwood at his clinic. "We know what you've been doing," one parent shouted. "You've been using our blood to perform dark rituals. You've been harming us to help our children. Dr. Blackwood remained calm, his eyes cold. I've been helping your children as I promised. The rituals are necessary. The parents were furious. You didn't tell us the truth. You tricked us. Alice stepped forward, holding up her phone. I've recorded everything, Dr. Blackwood. Your rituals, your confessions, it's over. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Dr. Blackwood's face. You don't understand, he said, his voice desperate. The rituals are the only way to heal these children. Without them, they will revert to their previous state. The parents hesitated, torn between their anger and the fear of losing the progress their children had made. But Alice was resolute. We can't let him continue, she said. There has to be another way. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. The group decided to confront Dr. Blackwood at the warehouse, where the rituals took place. As they approached, they could hear chanting from inside. Alice led the way, bursting through the door with the parents close behind. Dr. Blackwood stood at the altar, the vials of blood arranged before him. What are you doing here? He demanded, his eyes wild. We're stopping you, Alice said, her voice firm. No more rituals, no more lies. Dr. Blackwood's expression twisted with rage. You don't understand the power you're meddling with. If you stop me, the children will suffer. We'll find another way, a parent said, stepping forward. But we won't let you hurt us anymore. Dr. Blackwood's eyes glowed with an unnatural light. You think you can stop me? I'm the only one who can control this power. Alice raised her phone, the recording still playing. The world will know what you've done. With a roar of fury, Dr. Blackwood lunged at Alice, knocking the phone from her hand. It skidded across the floor, the recording continuing to play. The parents moved to protect Alice, but Dr. Blackwood was possessed by a dark energy, his strength overwhelming. In the chaos, the altar was overturned, the vials of blood spilling onto the floor. The dark symbols glowed ominously, and a cold wind swept through the warehouse. Dr. Blackwood screamed, his body convulsing as the dark power he had wielded turned against him. Chapter 9. The Evil Twist. As the dark energy consumed Dr. Blackwood, the parents watched in horror. His body twisted and contorted, his screams echoing through the warehouse. The symbols on the floor pulsed with a sinister light, growing brighter and more intense. Suddenly, the light exploded, blinding everyone in the room. When the light faded, Dr. Blackwood was gone. In his place stood a small, shadowy figure, a child with the same piercing blue eyes. The parents gasped in shock. What is that? One of them whispered. The child stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. You think you've won? He said, his voice a chilling echo of Dr. Blackwood's. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Alice's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The child smiled, a twisted, evil grin. Dr. Blackwood was merely a vessel, a means to an end. The power he sought to control has found a new host. The parents stared in disbelief as the child raised his hands, dark energy crackling around him. Your children may be healed, but the price is far from paid. The darkness will consume this town, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. With a final mocking laugh, the child vanished, leaving the parents and Alice in stunned silence. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the symbols on the floor still glowing faintly. Alice picked up her phone, the recording still intact. We need to get this to the authorities, she said, her voice shaking. People need to know the truth. But as they left the warehouse, a sense of dread settled over them. The battle with Dr. Blackwood was over, but the war against the darkness he had unleashed had only just begun. And as the parents returned to their children, they couldn't shake the feeling that the true cost of Dr. Blackwood's cures was yet to be revealed. The town of Ashgrove would never be the same, and the shadow of Dr. Blackwood's evil would linger, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect lives. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The revelation of Dr. Blackwood's dark practices shook the town of Ashgrove to its core. Alice Cooper's recorded evidence spread rapidly through news outlets and social media, drawing national attention to the small town. Investigations were launched, and authorities began to dig into Dr. Blackwood's past. His clinic was shut down, and the warehouse where the rituals took place was sealed off. But the scars left behind were not so easily healed. The parents who had once placed their hopes in Dr. Blackwood now faced an uncertain future. Many of them began to experience worsening symptoms of the conditions that had been transferred from their children. Their suffering became a painful reminder of the consequences of their desperation. Alice continued her investigation, driven by a need to understand the true extent of Dr. Blackwood's actions. She discovered that he had been involved in similar cases in other towns, always leaving a trail of despair and destruction in his wake. His true motives remained a mystery, but it was clear that he had been using his position to exploit vulnerable families for his own dark purposes. Chapter 11. The Unseen Enemy. As Alice delved deeper, she began to notice strange occurrences in Ash Grove. Children who had been treated by Dr. Blackwood started to exhibit unusual behaviors. They would wake up in the middle of the night, speaking in languages they had never learned. Their eyes glazed over with an eerie light. Some claimed to see shadows moving in their rooms, whispering secrets that no child should ever know. Parents were terrified, unsure of how to help their children. They turned to Alice for guidance, seeing her as the only person who had stood up to Dr. Blackwood. She felt the weight of their trust and fear, knowing that the battle was far from over. One night, as Alice was reviewing her notes, she received a frantic call from one of the parents. Their child, Emily, had gone missing. Alice rushed to their house, finding the family in a state of panic. They described how Emily had been acting strangely all day, and then, without warning, she had disappeared into the night. Determined to find Emily, Alice led a search party through the town and the surrounding woods. As they searched, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over them. It was as if the darkness that Dr. Blackwood had unleashed was tightening its grip on Ash Grove. Chapter 12. The Final Confrontation. Alice and the search party found Emily near the old warehouse. She was standing in a clearing, her eyes glowing with the same unnatural light that Alice had seen in Dr. Blackwood. The air around her crackled with dark energy, and the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. "Emily!" Alice called out, trying to reach the girl. "It's me, Alice! Come back to us!" Emily turned to face her, but her expression was blank, her voice a chilling echo. "It's too late, Miss Cooper. The darkness is here and it cannot be stopped." Alice felt a surge of fear, but she refused to back down. "Emily, you have to fight it. We're here to help you." But the darkness within Emily only grew stronger. The shadows around her began to coalesce into a form, a twisted, nightmarish figure that seemed to absorb all the light around it. Alice recognized it immediately, the same presence she had seen during Dr. Blackwood's rituals. The figure spoke, its voice a deep, resonant rumble that shook the ground. "You thought you could stop me, but you were wrong. I am eternal, and I will consume everything." Alice knew she had to act quickly. She remembered the recordings and the research she had done on ancient rituals. There was one chance, a desperate move that could banish the darkness, but it would require great sacrifice. Chapter 13. The Sacrifice. Alice stepped forward, her heart pounding. "If you want to take someone, take me. Leave these children and their families alone." The dark figure laughed, a sound that echoed through the clearing. "You think you can bargain with me? You are nothing but a mortal, powerless against my will." But Alice stood her ground. "I won't let you take them. I will fight you with everything I have." The figure paused, its form flickering. "Very well, Miss Cooper. If you wish to offer yourself, then so be it. But know this, your sacrifice will only delay the inevitable." Alice closed her eyes, summoning all her courage. She began to chant the incantation she had learned, drawing on the strength of the light within her. The darkness around her writhed and shrieked, but she held firm, focusing on the words and the power they invoked. As she chanted, a bright light began to emanate from her, pushing back the shadows. The dark figure roared in anger, its form dissolving in the brilliance of the light. Emily collapsed to the ground, the unnatural glow fading from her eyes. Alice felt her strength waning, but she continued the incantation, determined to banish the darkness once and for all. The light grew brighter, consuming everything in its path. With a final, defiant scream, the dark figure was vanquished, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Chapter 14. The Legacy. When the light faded, Alice fell to the ground, exhausted but victorious. The search party rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. Emily was dazed but unharmed, her eyes returning to their normal color. The town of Ashgrove began to heal, but the scars of Dr. Blackwood's evil lingered. The parents who had suffered continued to struggle, but they found strength in their community and in each other. Alice became a hero in their eyes, a symbol of hope and resilience. She continued to write about her experiences, using her platform to raise awareness about the dangers of quick fixes and miracle cures. She urged people to question and investigate, to never blindly trust those who promised easy solutions. But the battle had taken its toll on Alice. She knew that the darkness she had faced was not truly gone, only banished for a time. She remained vigilant, always aware that the evil could return. And in the shadows of Ashgrove, a small, sinister figure watched and waited, its piercing blue eyes gleaming with the promise of vengeance. The legacy of Dr. Blackwood lived on, a constant reminder that the fight against darkness was never truly over.